the mercies of God to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. He says, therefore, I urge you, brethren. There is one thing that I see over and over missing in all these expositors. When I come to church, I don't want to hear a New Testament class. I want to hear preaching. I want to see a man who has life and death painted on his face. I want to have the great matters of eternity set before me. I want to be urged. I want to be begged. I want to be pleaded with, because the subject matter is worthy of it. And this was the Apostle Paul. He doesn't just lay truth before people and then walk off the platform patting himself on the back because he did a good job expositing a text. No! There should be no contentment in the preacher unless God is glorified and men and women are moved. Paul says, I urge you, I beseech you, I beg you, brethren. Here is a man who, whether in body or not in body, saw glory, saw paradise. He knows what's at stake. A vision of Christ. He knows the worth of him. And he comes back to us who have clouded eyes and dull ears and passive hearts, and he says, stop it. Stop looking at all the things in this world. Stop being so troubled with so many things. I urge you to do something. What is that something? He says to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice. To present. It's an aorist tense here. It's the idea of, it's not this every Sunday make a new pledge. It's the prophetic call of how long will you limp between two opinions? If Christ is Lord, then once and for all, offer yourself. Once and for all, stand. Especially you men, stand. I urge you, he says, to present your bodies. Why does he say bodies here? I think it's the wisdom of God. It becomes so tiring after a while to hear everyone talk about their heart. But you need to understand something. You can talk all day about the inward workings of your heart, but unless it manifests itself outwardly in your body, in what you do, it's meaningless. It's meaningless. What do you do? Church, listen to me. We're not standing here at the end of an era. No. It's time to go on and go on and go on. There is so much right here, so much more that can be done here. So much work to be done to take the gospel to the nations, to take the gospel to this nation. So much to be done in Bible translation. There are so many things that can be done, and that's the pain of it. And you say, yes, we have great men and women to do it, but those great men and women cannot do it without everyone that I'm looking at right now. And everyone hearing my voice. Everyone has a place, a work, a task to either go down in the well or to hold the rope for those who go down. To serve Christ. To serve Christ. He goes, present your bodies as a living and holy sacrifice. When I was a brand new convert, one of my dear friends was talking to Leonard Ravenhill, the old English revivalist, and said, Brother Paul's really been struggling with some things. I was a brand new believer, just a year or two old. Leonard Ravenhill sent me a tract, and the tract said, others can, you cannot. And what that tract basically said was this: yes, others can play with the world, others can walk hand in hand with the world, others can live trivial lives and play trivial games, but if you want to be an instrument of God, you cannot. The Christian life does not begin with what you do. It begins with what you don't do. Because if you don't turn away from some things, it doesn't matter what you do on the other side. It doesn't matter if you take a shower 5 times a day, if 7 times a day you fall back into the cesspool. We are a people called by God. Do you see that? We have been called out of this world, out of its moral filth, out of its moral decay. We have been called out of its trivial, the trivial that it does. Playing with marbles, wasting its life until it finally crawls into the grave, no wiser than when it started. You've been called out to serve Him. You've been called out for eternity. You've been called out. So come out. The things in your life that are soiling you, the things in your life that are holding you back, the sins that are besetting you, let them go. You say, well, I'm in a holy church. It doesn't matter if you're in a holy church, if you're not a holy person. You say, I'm in a church that is really, really given to the Great Commission. It doesn't matter if you're not given to the Great Commission. You don't fight this war by proxy. You are so special. You have a place. You have a place. Come out. Not just leaving immorality behind, but leaving the trivial behind. So much wasted time. So much looking and looking and looking. No. That's not for you. As wine is to be given for those who have no hope, let those things be given to people who have no hope. But you have hope of eternal life and eternal glory and of eternal purpose. Awake, sleeper, and arise. Come out from among them. He has called you to be sons and daughters. You were born in Zion. Your name is inscribed in the book. Come out and join forces with those who labor, with those who suffer, with those who cry, with those who fight. Present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God. Acceptable to God. What do we care about whether or not we're acceptable to this world, this dark, twisted, stinking, filthy world? That now the West, turned over to apparent reprobation and apart from a revival, will run headlong into hell. What do we care? Let the dead speak to the dead. Your only concern is to be acceptable to God and do what is pleasing in His sight. That's your only concern. And again, I'm not talking to a group of people. I'm talking to you and you and you and you. Acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. The word can also mean rational. I remember one time there was an atheist that had been brought to me by a person who claimed to be a Christian but lived in continuous carnality, wanted me to witness, and I just stopped and I said, you know what, I have more problems with you than I have with the atheist. And they said, how can you say that? I said, because he's consistent. He's immoral. And that's consistent with what he says he believes. There is no God. There is no absolute truth. He can run on instinct. And at least I have to applaud his logic. But you have no rationality to you. You're a walking contradiction. If Jesus Christ is Lord to you, and He is, but if you claim to be aware of it, that He is your Lord, you acknowledge Him as Lord, well, there's an issue there. It's called sovereignty. Lords are sovereign, and they reveal their sovereign will through certain decrees. This book. The most rational thing you can do is give your life away. Jim Elliot, he is no fool to give up that which he cannot keep, to gain that which he can never lose. That's not just for missionaries. That's for everyone. Everyone sitting here. Everyone hearing my voice, please, I urge you, I beg you, I plead with you. Now you say, Brother Paul, I understand this. I understand. But the motivation, Brother Paul, I understand. I want to be more. But the motivation. Paul deals with that here in verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God. What is he saying? He is telling the Romans that the most rational thing they can do is give themselves lock, stock, and barrel to God. He's telling them to give away the most precious thing they possess. Even Satan told the truth on this one. When he destroyed every one of Job's possessions and relations and everything else, and Job remains faithful, and then Satan comes back and says, let me touch his body. Here Paul is urging, begging, pleading, entreating you to give your body, your mind, your heart, your soul, your future, everything. Now, what could be the motivation that would cause us to do that? Why would anyone do that? The mercies of God. What are the mercies of God? First of all, notice he says mercies. I think there's a little bit of Paul being a Jew in this, because he went with the plural. And when you do, it's an idea of abundance, multifaceted. It's big. So he says, I'm telling you to do this most difficult thing, and the motivation I give you is the mercy of God. But what are those mercies, Paul? That's why the The word therefore is so important because it connects chapter 12 with the first 11 chapters. And what did he do in the first 11 chapters? He explained to the Romans and to us everything God has done for us in Christ. Everything God, he says, I have intricately gone through this theology with you of what God has done for you in his Son. Do you think he did that just so you could be smart or make a good grade? No, he did that not only to save you, but to motivate you. From where does motivation come? Let's go back to Daniel, remember? Those who know their God. And what's the best place to know God? In Christ. And what's the best place to know Christ? In his cross. In his cross. When I became a Christian, I was well aware of my inabilities, that I would never become this theologian who understood all these things. So I thought, I will do one thing. Even though I cannot give a lecture on eschatology and I can't give a lecture on certain things and I'm not very good at apologetics, I will do one thing. I will study the cross. I will devote my life to one thing, knowing what it means that Jesus Christ died for me. And that knowledge is enough to take the weakest man and make him strong, the most pliant man and make him defiant, to make him run when he can't walk, to make him lift when he is weary, to go on and on and on. There is enough motivation.
Persistirá en su ira para siempre porque se complace en la misericordia. Volverá a compadecerse de nosotros. Hollará nuestras iniquidades, sí, arrojarás a las profundidades del mar todos nuestros pecados. Versículo 19 se encuentra en muchos himnos, cánticos que se cantan por todo el mundo. Y es correcto cantar estas palabras con alegría, pero yo creo que se demanda más que alegría, solemnidad. Y los que solamente pueden cantar estas palabras con alegría no entienden el texto. Cuando uno lee este texto piensa, ay, qué lindo, Dios no ha pisoteado nuestras iniquidades, así, ¡pum! O que Dios, no, Él ha agarrado nuestro pecado como una bola y lo ha tirado al mar. ¡Qué lindo! Vamos a cantar con alegría. Hermano, no entiendes el texto. No entiendes el texto. Dios agarró nuestro pecado y imputó nuestro pecado a su Hijo y pisoteó su Hijo bajo su ira. Dios tomó nuestro pecado como una bola, los imputó su Hijo, agarró a su Hijo y lo tiró al mar de su ira. Si tu labio no está temblando cuando cantas este texto, tú no entiendes este texto. Jonás era culpable y se tiró al mar para salvar al bote y los inocentes que estaban dentro. Cristo, el inocente, se tiró al mar de la ira de Dios para salvar la nave de Sión y los culpables que están dentro. Cuando yo tenía como 27 años, algunos profesores, 24 años, algunos profesores me preguntaron: Pablo, ¿quieres estudiar tu PhD? Sí. ¿Qué quieres estudiar? ¿El Evangelio? No, ya hemos estudiado esto. Entonces no voy a estudiar mi PhD, porque quiero dedicar mi vida a estudiar una sola cosa. No soy un hombre inteligente, vengo del campo, de una hacienda pequeña. No soy súper inteligente, no soy académico, no puedo estudiar todo en la Biblia. Entonces voy a dedicarme a estudiar una sola cosa: el Evangelio. ¿Qué hizo mi Señor por mí? Ahora, décadas han pasado. Muchas veces 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 16 horas al día. Dios sabe que no estoy mintiendo. Yo no entiendo mucho acerca de la escatología, aunque probablemente debo saber más. Pero el Evangelio, estudio el Evangelio, y después de más que 30 años estudiando el Evangelio, ni he subido los cerros más pequeños. Algunos pastores piensan: ya entiendo el Evangelio. No entiendes el Evangelio. Mira, vamos a estar en el cielo una eternidad, y después de miles de eternidades todavía no vas a comprender todo lo que se encuentra en la obra de Cristo o la persona de Cristo. Cuando vemos lo que Él hizo en la cruz, cuando crecemos en nuestro conocimiento de verdad, la transacción, lo que sucedió ahí cuando murió, es absolutamente increíble. Varios, aún jóvenes, vienen a mí y dicen que faltan motivación y no saben dónde sacar la energía y la fuerza para seguir adelante. Es porque no están estudiando lo que deben estudiar. La cruz y todo lo que sucedió ahí. Ahora, vamos a volver un ratito a Romanos. Hay dos palabras que vamos a ver brevemente. Siendo justificados gratuitamente por su gracia por medio de la redención que es en Cristo Jesús. Hermanos, a veces yo me enfermo durante tiempos de alabanza. Cuando yo veo a los cristianos tan felices usando la palabra redención o Cristo como rescate. De verdad, con gozo está bien, pero fíjense lo que están diciendo. Él pagó el precio. Él compró nuestra libertad con su sangre. Con su sangre. Redención denota la liberación de un prisionero, un cautivo, un esclavo, por medio de pagar un rescate, por medio de pagar un precio. ¿Y cuál fue el precio? La sangre preciosa de Cristo. Pero hermanos, no es suficiente decir la sangre preciosa de Cristo y dejar de hablar. No es suficiente, especialmente en el mundo latino. Y mi familia viene de Croacia y los croatas son aún más católicos que ustedes. En la iglesia católica, la muerte de Cristo ha llegado a ser como algo romántico. Él murió como mártir. Y cuando vemos la cruz debemos decir, ay, qué pena, pobre Jesucito, que sufrió tanto. O aún los predicadores evangélicos, cuando hablan del precio que Cristo pagó, solamente hablan de sus sufrimientos físicos. No, de hecho, los sufrimientos físicos, especialmente a las manos de los gentiles, los paganos, eran parte de la maldición y lo que él tenía que sufrir. Pero si somos salvos, no somos salvos porque los romanos golpearon a Jesús. No somos salvos simplemente porque sufrió físicamente. Ustedes recuerdan cuando Jesús estuvo en Getsemaní, que dijo que esta copa, Señor, no esta copa, no. En este momento, porque Jesús era Dios, pero a la vez era hombre y creció en conocimiento. En este momento, Jesús le fue revelado exactamente, perfectamente, lo que iba a tener que sufrir para nuestra redención. Y le chocó como una camioneta. ¡Pum! No. Sí. No mi voluntad, la tuya. Angustiado, orando, sudando. Y muchos predicadores evangélicos dicen, mira, él sabía los sufrimientos, los clavos, la cruz, los golpes, lo que los romanos iban a hacer a él. Y por eso está allí en Getsemaní, temblando. No. ¿Cómo puede ser que cuando nosotros leemos los libros de la historia de los mártires, ¿no? Muchos de los mártires fueron crucificados, al revés, algunos después de crucificarlos, ¿no? Prendidos para que mueran así con fuego. Pero en las historias leemos que ellos fueron a la cruz cantando, como hombres, con coraje, hasta con gozo. Pero el capitán de su salvación está allí en un huerto, con angustia, diciendo no. Hermanos, es cierto, los sufrimientos físicos de Cristo eran indecibles. Yo no creo que ningún hombre haya sufrido como él sufrió físicamente. La vergüenza, más que lo que puedes imaginarte. Pero la pena de la cruz, la clave es en la cruz. Dios el Padre imputó el pecado del pueblo de Dios a él. Y todo el odio divino, toda la furia justa, todo el aborrecimiento de un Dios santo, santo, santo contra la maldad cayó sobre el Hijo. Hace como 4 años yo pasé varios meses estudiando solamente las 3 horas de oscuridad. Yo no creo que eran 3 horas de un cielo nublado. Yo creo que era como Egipto, Egipto. Porque Cristo tenía que ser encarcelado, encerrado en como una cárcel a solas, en la absoluta oscuridad, mientras ola tras ola tras ola de la ira de Dios caía sobre él, hasta que el precio fuera pagado. Y él gritó: consumada es. Dios nos condenó y Dios, ayúdame con la palabra, Dios nos condenó y Dios absorbió la condenación en sí mismo. Dios derramó su castigo sobre nosotros y Dios, en la persona de Jesucristo, absorbió el castigo y la condenación. De nuevo, quizás van a tener que ayudarme. Los chinos tienen un dicho que un hombre no ha perdido su vida, que pasa cada hora de su vida solamente contemplando la belleza de una flor. Yo les digo, un cristiano no ha malgastado su vida, habiendo dedicado su vida a simplemente contemplar la cruz del Calvario. ¿Por qué algunos hermanos y hermanas en la historia de la iglesia son tan excepcionales?